Thank you, Alice, for the invitation. I'm very honored to have been selected to talk about my career. And I didn't really plan it out, so I want us to have a conversation. So please, tell me what you're more interested in and less interested in. I am in charge of public affairs and sustainability for Pirelli in North America, US, Canada, and Mexico. It's an interesting combination of two things, and I can talk about what public affairs means and what sustainability means. I know a lot of people are really interested in sustainability nowadays and maybe not necessarily clear about how, what that means in a company, and I'm happy to talk about that. I can also sort of run through how I ended up in Italy and, this kind of thing. So should I start at the beginning?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I grew up in Washington, D.C. and studied French in high school, like a lot of people, and went to college, and I was looking for I was fulfilling my language requirement. I went to Yale, and I didn't want to get up too early in the morning, so Italian was at 10:30. And then after sophomore year, I decided I wanted to go abroad, so the obvious thing was Italy. So I went to Florence on the Middlebury program. Yale didn't have a program at the time. And I went for the second semester of junior year. Loved Florence, of course, and kind of, all I could think about was, how do I come back, right? So I graduated. I majored in history. I did a lot of Italian. I ended up doing quite a bit of literature, but my major was history. I wrote my thesis on Marinetti because who knows who Marinetti is? Okay, Marinetti was the founder of the Futurist movement. So it kind of set up the cultural, which most people know as an art movement, but he was actually a poet, mostly, and kind of set up the cultural groundwork for Mussolini to come in. And so there was a big link between futurism and fascism. So Marinetti's daughter had given all of his works to the Yale Rare Book Library. And so my professor asked me to be the first person to go through, this paperwork. And at the time, this was giving away my age. This was 1986 when I graduated from college, and fascism and futurism in particular was still kind of a taboo subject. So there weren't a lot of secondary sources. And then right after that, there was an exhibition in Venice where they borrowed these papers and things from the Yale Library, and it was in Palazzo Grassi, so I went to this exhibition, and it was kind of, after that it became okay to write about futurism, study futurism. There was a big exhibit at the Guggenheim maybe 1 or 2 years ago, so it was kind of an interesting thing to be like at the beginning of that. But I'm taking too long.
No.
So then as I said, I just wanted to get back to Italy, so I got a job as a trip leader for Putney Student Travel for the summer, and I kept my ticket, and then I sort of took a year off. Meanwhile, I applied to graduate schools, got into 3 graduate schools for international relations, and one of them was the Johns Hopkins program, which is in Bologna and Washington, so that seemed kind of perfect. But I deferred them all, and I just went off to Florence, and with no money and no cell phone, and my mother wasn't so happy about it. And so I worked in a garden in a villa. There was this villa that they were fixing up, and so there were a bunch of people my age who kind of traveling, working in the garden in exchange for their room. I taught English and so on. Then I decided, then I realized I don't have the money for grad school. So somebody told me that if I went into the London School of Economics, it would be only 1 year and it would be cheaper. So I did. I actually I'm telling you the whole truth. This is why I went to a wonderful school. It was a wonderful school. I was very lucky to get in and so on. But I did a master's degree at the London School of Economics in European Studies, it was called. And I focused on, I did my thesis on Italian Middle East policy, and which included the Achille Lauro hostage story, which was very interesting because Italy had tried to have its own, kind of break away from the American post-war kind of heavy leadership and have its own little moment of Middle East policy, and then the U.S. kind of came in and said, no, you can't do that. So that was what my thesis was. And then, but I got interested in law because we were studying the European Union and how the legal system was changing, and governments were transferring legal authority to a higher entity. And so I decided I want to go to law school. It's got to be in Italy or the UK. So I signed up for the Italian Università Statale, and I got a job as a paralegal in Baker & McKenzie, Milan. And then it took a long time for the paperwork to get my iscrizione. You all speak Italian, right? And then no? Okay.
It's okay.
To get enrolled
Enrolled,
in the university. And then the second year there was a student strike for the whole year called the Panther Movement, which I still don't know what that was. And so I, meanwhile, was being treated like an associate in the law firm, and taught all of this legal work and maintaining correspondence with clients, and it was very interesting. I learned so much. And so then I decided after 2.5 years at Baker & McKenzie that I was never going to get my Italian law degree and I should go to law school in the US. But before I did that, I was just looking through the Corriere della Sera at the job ads, and they were looking, and there was a small ad that said American daily news in Italian, American daily newspaper looking for a secretary. So I called just to see what daily newspaper, and it was the Wall Street Journal. So, and they were looking for a news assistant. So I applied and I got that job, and I changed careers. And then I was the news assistant for the Milan correspondent of the Wall Street Journal. But after 8 months, the guy who hired me, and at the time there was one correspondent and one news assistant for covering Italy for the Wall Street Journal Europe, which also fed into the Wall Street Journal US. And so after 8 months, this correspondent left to become one of the founding journalists at Bloomberg. And it took them 4 months to replace the correspondent. So I just started sending in articles, and they started publishing them. Obviously checking the facts and making sure I was. And then when they hired the new correspondent, they asked her to train me as a journalist. And so we worked together, and this is the early 90s now, and there was this corruption scandal called Tangentopoli. And so we were writing 4 articles a day, and it was very exciting times. The whole political system was changing, the whole economic system was changing. It was really, talk about being in the right place at the right time, and I loved it. And then in '95, the correspondent went back to the U.S. and they promoted me to be the correspondent. So I know you came here to hear about sustainability.
Do you still see in Pirelli, for example, these shifts of career happening from law school to journalism, and then I don't know what's the next step, but somehow it bring you to Pirelli, so it's not journalism anymore?
Right. That's a good question. My feeling is that my career, my changing all the time was very unusual for my generation, and it is less unusual now. But you may have a different feeling. I think that people who are in their 20s and 30s today can be very, take charge of their career, learn something new, make a change, be entrepreneurial more than my generation could have. And so I think I was lucky, and also kind of willing to take risks and so on. So, do you agree? Disagree?
Yes, I'm not the best example, but I see new generations shifting more than in the past.
Now, if I had completed law school, I would have been so in debt that I would not have been able to make those changes. So it was sort of, lucky because I got a lot of legal training, and also my Italian became really good because I was translating legal documents and so on. So anyway, journalism career, and then the reason I actually left the Wall Street Journal was for personal reasons, because by that time I was married and had 2 small children, and it was really hard to keep up with everything. I mean, I was just overwhelmed, and so I went to the Wall Street Journal and I said, because at that point I was the correspondent, I had 1 news assistant, and we were covering a lot of news. And I was traveling all over the country, and I had these little kids, and so I went to the Wall Street Journal, and I said I would like to just stop, and I would like to have an arrangement where I can freelance and send in articles and be paid by the article, but you get another correspondent, and just in order to be with my family. And so we did that for a while, and then I ended up doing a couple of other, I became correspondent for something called Breaking Views, which was a sort of a comments column, and I could do that from home, and I did that for a while. And then I started doing other freelancing. I ended up doing Business Week and writing for some Italian publications, and then my kids were getting older, and I was ready to kind of go back more full time, and so I had this offer from Bloomberg, and I was going to be. It was an interesting offer because instead of covering just one sector, I was going to be kind of on the important stories, whichever, because I had kept in touch with all these news organizations and so on. So it was a great offer. Bloomberg has this process where they have you interview everyone all the way up to the this number 2 CEO. And so I was in this process. I had done all my interviews except for one or 2. But I had this offer, and Pirelli called, and I had not wanted, kind of in the back pocket was, I can go do communications for a company. But it wasn't really, I loved journalism, absolutely. And then Pirelli came with a really interesting, at an interesting time and with an interesting offer, and they asked me to be head of international media relations, and they already knew me and I already knew them, and it was a time when there was a lot of turmoil, let's say, and so the company at the time owned Telecom Italia, or at least a majority stake, and there was actually a lot of what I would call fake news out about Pirelli and about Telecom Italia. So there were some scandals. I was actually approached at a party that I went to by an Italian I didn't know, who tried to plant a story on me for Business Week, saying that Telecom Italia was going to go bankrupt. And I went home and kind of looked at their financial information, and I said, no, this is fake. So something's going on. So anyway, so I got very interested in the Pirelli's offer, and I decided to leave journalism, join Pirelli, go into communications, and it was very exciting times. There were some offers coming in for, Pirelli was working to bring in other international shareholders, and so we were working, on all these interesting things, and I was talking to the press a lot, and then Pirelli sold Telecom Italia, and suddenly I was working for a tire company, and I knew nothing about tires. Of course, one of my sons was 9 when I went to work for Pirelli, and he said, "Mom, I'm so excited that you're going to work for Pirelli. It's the best company." He plays a lot of video games. Best company ever. And then he goes, "Why would they want you?" It was very fun. So I started learning about tires, and I was in the communications department, and then I realized that I wanted to go back to this thing about changing. I wanted change, and so I started talking with some of the people in the company about moving over to the government relations area. So I ended up joining a different department after a couple of years of communications, joining a different department where I was coordinating the government affairs in the different countries. So I didn't have anything to do with the Italy government affairs, but I was traveling a lot. I went to Brazil, I went to China. We were opening new factories around the world, and there was a need to kind of just make sure everyone was, not that I would not go directly necessarily and talk to the Chinese government, but I would just talk with our local people and make sure that we were all coordinated, and it was very, very interesting to get involved in that. And then, meanwhile, my kids are growing up, and we opened a factory in Mexico in 2012. So I was flying over to Mexico. I was actually meeting with the Mexican government somewhat to talk about, this project. And then I was coming over, then we decided to open a New York office. Pirelli had a factory in Georgia. Most of the people were based there, and it was kind of a small operation. And then we decided to go bigger in the US and open a New York office. So then the CEO here, the local CEO, was asking me to come, and from Milan, I would fly over here and meet with people and kind of try to open doors and get to know the chambers of commerce and so on, and kind of give advice on how to get Pirelli set up with relationships with government type entities and so on. So in Italian, it's actually called institutional relations. And then everybody realized that I should just move here, and so we created a role for me doing public affairs. So that meant coordinating. Now I can talk about what I do. Sorry for the long.
Now we can keep going.
Hopefully it was unusual if that. Okay, so I'm in charge of public affairs. There's a lot of the way that you could also kind of call that lobbying. I mean, most people that do public affairs are lobbying. We do not lobby directly, but also the way lobbying works in Washington, and as I mentioned, I'm from Washington, D.C., and I had, in high school, I had been an intern on Capitol Hill, so I knew a little bit about how things worked in Washington. And the way things work is there's a lot of coalitions of companies. You know this, you're a lawyer?
Yes.
So we're a member of the Tire Trade Association, which has 12 members, and they're tire companies that have manufacturing in the United States. Then we're a member of an organization of international companies with headquarters abroad, which at a time like this is actually pretty important, because it seems like foreign companies are bad, and then the third one is, and I just came from Washington today because I was meeting with the Government Affairs Committee of the Auto Parts Association, which turns out the largest, the most jobs in one category in the United States, I heard them saying this, I can't guarantee this, but is in auto parts, supply chain of automotive. It's huge in the United States. And actually it's a growing sector, and so there's a real need, there's a lot going on, but we were down there talking about the fact that the new NAFTA agreement, which is called USMCA, needs to pass, because otherwise there's going to be sort of dire consequences for everybody. We were talking about how the narrative that you hear, around is that jobs move to Mexico, when in fact, certainly in the automotive industry, there's a sort of integrated supply chain in the region, and which has resulted in creating jobs both in Mexico and in the United States, but they're differentiated. So in the case of Pirelli, we have high skills manufacturing in Georgia, and we have lower cost manufacturing in Mexico, and there are two different types of processes and even products and so on, but we have that as a package. So, we consider the region one area. So anyway, so those are kind of the ways that I get engaged in public affairs. In the Tire Trade Association in Washington, there are lots and lots of committees, and so I'm now because I also do sustainability, which I'll talk about in a second, I am the chair of the committee of the Tire Trade Association on environment, health and safety, and sustainability. So we talk together with the other companies about, for instance, what to do about scrap tires at the end of their life, and that's something that all over the world we do in coalition with the other tire companies. So I don't want to bore you with too much about that, but I will talk a minute about sustainability. So in Pirelli, we have a very strong sustainability program, and it comes out of the headquarters in Milan. So we have a team in Milan that's responsible for sustainability for globally, and they come up with a sustainability strategy and do the sustainability reporting, which is a big deal. We have our annual report for investors is called an integrated report, and it has sustainability and financial all woven in together. And that's kind of how we advance sustainability, because every year we have targets and then we try to improve and so on. So they decided that in order to really implement the sustainability strategy worldwide, there would be a person in each region that already has another job, but that would be responsible for working with the local CEO to get the sustainability strategy implemented. And that includes things like making sure that the environmental managers in the factories kind of input their data, so that we have all the updated data all the time about water, waste, energy, CO2 emissions. It includes, so that means I don't have to do that myself, but I'm just kind of checking in that all these things have gotten done. We also have a sustainability program that affects the HR department with training and some things regarding employee satisfaction and involvement and so on. And then there's a part that has to do with the community, and so we do, actually each region has to do a stakeholder dialogue, for example. So we invited some stakeholders from the community to talk about how can Pirelli contribute more to the conversation about road safety, what can we do, as a member of society. And then the other question that we put to the stakeholders was about we were in Georgia, where our factory is, and how can we contribute to this area, this sort of relatively rural area, to the talent and skills development here, and interact with local universities and have people want to come to this area for jobs and so on. So that's all part of sustainability, and then the last part is things like donations, and we have a program with the Boys and Girls Club in Georgia and so on. So if you're interested, I can run through a little bit of this, which is displayed. Yeah.
Please.
Okay.
Question, but in terms of products,
Yeah.
is Pirelli equal tires, or there are other
That is
product categories that?
That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked, because Pirelli used to have cables and real estate, and the cables are now called Prysmian, sold off, and the real estate was sold, and then and Pirelli became a pure tire company. But then there was another split where the truck tire part is now separate, and that's called Prometeon. So actually Pirelli is only high-end car and motorcycle tires, motorsports and bicycle tires. So I'm glad you asked the question, because it's not obvious. So the other thing about being in New York is that I help the team, the sustainability team in Milan, with some of the outward engagement with the United Nations and other things. But I won't dwell on this slide. This is just to say that it's very, we have all these systems in place for sustainability governance, all the way up to the board of directors, and then we have all these environmental management systems. We have an anti-bribery program, green purchasing, and things like that. And then all of this, and then we talk about creating value for all stakeholders, which is a theme that's been in the news recently. You saw that? Yeah.
Sorry. So sustainability here is not only environmental sustainability; it's like sustainable business model, right?
Exactly.
That's how you
Yes.
perceive your job.
Exactly. It's I would call it a 360-degree cultural shift, and it's about creating value for all stakeholders and not just shareholders. Which actually, if you think about it, if you create value for all the other stakeholders, it's all also going to feed into good business practices and creating profit. More, there's a business case that's been established. But so the stakeholders are, I'll actually go through this. But sustainability is, a lot of people think it's just environmental. It is, our sustainability program is basically investor focused. So we, not that it's focused on investors, but we sort of do all the things that that a sustainability investor would be looking for. And I'll get into that more. So the sort of foundation of it is all these policies, a lot of rigorous activity on making sure that we are managing any kind of risk, whether it's environmental or corruption, ethical, or human rights risks, and I'll talk about that more. And then another stakeholder is the employees. I think there's a slide on who the stakeholders are. Yes, I'll go back, but the stakeholders that we consider that we're trying to create value for are shareholders in the financial community, customers, employees, local communities, public administration and government, NGOs. So like you'll see later that we work with the World Wildlife Fund and so on. Suppliers, competitors, and the environment itself is a stakeholder. So we're trying to create value in that area, or at least move towards a time when we will be able to. So, so this is sort of the foundation. We also engage a lot outside the company, and I was mentioning that I get involved in that just because I live in New York, and so a lot of these things are here. This year we won the Ford Sustainability Award. So there's a lot going on in the car companies are asking for their supply chain to be improving in many, many areas, so environmental, social, and governance. And so we work with them and find out what they want and so on. And then these are like stock indexes that we've been singled out as being very good in our sustainability program. There's also a link between sustainability and innovation, because really the word sustainability means that you're going to last over time. So there's also the other cultural shift besides going from shareholders to stakeholders is the shift from short-term focus to long-term focus. And that includes strategic thinking about, for example, the future of mobility, the future of cities. Are we going to have car sharing everywhere? How does that, will we be selling tires instead of the way we are now by the unit of tire in a tire dealer? Are we going to be selling to an autonomous vehicle fleet and charging them for the miles as opposed to the unit? Does that make sense? And that's something that comes up in sustainability because, for example, you can sell, if you're a lighting company, you could sell light bulbs or you could sell light. And if you sell light, you're saying, let's say I'm selling light to a factory. I'm saying that I will give you, these kilowatts of light, and when it needs to be changed, I come in and do that. But it's an incentive for me as the lighting company to make lights that last, right? And same with tires. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So I talked about how we had a stakeholder dialogue here in the U.S. around road safety and talent skills development. We also, there's a system that most big companies today use, which is listening to stakeholders in order to get input on your sustainability strategy, and then making this kind of materiality matrix, meaning what is material for my company in the sustainability area, and what should I therefore work on in my sustainability strategy. So one of the big things that comes up is what materials are we using in our tires? Are they fossil fuel materials? Are we doing some R&D to change that, and so on? And so that's how you kind of start your sustainability journey, is you do this, you survey everybody, and everybody comes back and says, well, you should be focusing on safety of the passengers and the babies in the back seat with your tires. Or you should be focusing on human rights in your supply chain. Are you sure that there's not slave labor somewhere down the line making, carbon black or one of the materials in your tires? These, I don't know if you all are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, but the UN, right after the Paris Agreement, the UN adopted these goals, 17 goals, which countries are supposed to be working towards. And things like eliminate poverty and so on. And there's a whole system where the country delegations have to report back, and there's progress being measured. But companies are starting to get involved and say, okay, when I work on I'll talk about natural rubber. Rubber comes from trees, and it's like maple syrup. You get it out of the tree, kind of like sap, and it grows. The trees grow in Southeast Asia, and what's happening is, like many other things, as demand for rubber grows, there are we presume that there are people in Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia that might be cutting down a natural forest in order to plant trees to meet this growing demand. And it might be palm oil, palm trees, it might be some other agricultural product, or in our case it might be rubber trees. And so there's been a lot of noise from the Rainforest Alliance and the World Wildlife Fund about, what are you tire companies doing to know that the rubber that you buy didn't cause deforestation. And then there are other issues like are the smallholders being, do they have human rights? Is their biodiversity being protected, and so on. And so we've gotten involved in that on two fronts. But this is an example of how we might say, okay, well, if we're going to work on this deforestation issue, that's our contribution to one of these goals, right? Like I think there's one about forests and trees, or maybe it's a sub goal because all of these have sub categories. And I'm going to skip around in this presentation a little bit. I'm going to talk about this. Okay, so unfortunately there are estimated to be more than 6 million farmers worldwide working on natural rubber. So they're very small. It's a very fragmented supply chain. There are lots of intermediaries between, so there might be 2 or 3 by the time that the rubber gets to us, right? And then we turn it into a tire, and then it goes to the car maker, and then it goes to the driver. So this is the rubber value chain, right? And so we're trying to work on two fronts. One is to have our own ability to trace this supply chain and to know what they're doing and to encourage better practices and to have goals about that. And the other thing is to realizing that it's a huge problem that we can't tackle alone. The other approach is to work with everybody. And so we created, not just Pirelli, but we pushed a lot to create a global platform. So there's an office in Singapore. It's called the Sustainable Natural Rubber Initiative, or platform or something. And the members are Pirelli, Michelin, Bridgestone, all the tire companies, and BMW, Ford, the car companies are involved. And then also other members are processors, rubber dealers, and so on. But our approach to this, the platform is great because they're coming up with, over time we're going to get alignment around how can we track this, what partners can we have on the ground that check and audit and so on. And then whether there might be a specific certification program that farmers can use so that by the time we got the rubber. And then there's a big question like, can you use blockchain for this? And so on. So this is all evolving. But meanwhile, on our own purchasing of rubber, we have developed this very strong policy, and it's based on all of these things. It's kind of huge if you think of like tire companies supposed to be making and selling tires, but actually we have this policy that basically asks our first level supplier to come with a roadmap every year on how they're going to achieve all these things going down their supply chain. And then every year they have to kind of refresh it and say, well, we've been able to map out a little bit better who's in our supply chain, or we've done this, or we've done a partnership, or we've trained people, or we've gone down there on the ground and helped to develop local communities to prevent conflicts related to land ownership or whatever it is. And so, and then we've made a commitment to publish the results that we're getting every year. And a lot of people are watching this, believe it or not. But in here, there's things like, it says preserving resources. So one of the things is reduce the average mass of tires. So we're trying to make tires with less material. But then it's also, extending tire life, increasing material recovery along the whole supply chain. So there are all these all these aspects to it, which I find really interesting. It's not just no deforestation. It's not just getting the farmers a living wage, but it's all these things. I think I'm taking a long time, but
How, if I may,
yeah.
with regard to natural rubber, what percentage of the product is natural rubber as compared to man-made?
Yeah.
Products?
I think about 20% of a tire is natural rubber, and even though there's also synthetic rubber in a tire, no one has figured out how to make a tire without any natural rubber. Although there are substitutes now from other plants. So one that we've been working with is a cactus plant. It's called guayule, and it grows in the desert. And so that would be amazing because then you wouldn't consume water, and there wouldn't be deforestation.
Presumably you could farm it and grow it as you wish.
Exactly. So the problem with it, and the reason we're not going all out with this substitute, is that you need so many cactuses to get one drop of rubber. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's just not cost effective yet. But it's possible. Like we've made tires with that. And then there's another plant called the Russian dandelion that also has a rubbery substance that also works, but needs more development too. And so there's a lot of R&D going into these things, including, so about 20% is natural rubber. Then there's the synthetic rubber, which at the moment is mostly petroleum based. And so tire companies are looking at how to change that, and then there are other ingredients like silica, and we have some. We have a silica replacement, which is rice husk ash. So it's the husk of the rice that you're throwing away, and then it's burned, and then it makes this substitute for silica. These are just examples of what's going on in that. So that's part of sustainability. And the way I organized this presentation was to look at the whole life cycle of the tire. So you have the raw materials, we just talked about some of that. You have the manufacturing phase, and so you have the emissions from the factory, things like water use in the factory and waste in the factory and so on. Then you have, and we measure all the like the CO2 impact all the way through. So we'll take a tire and we'll say, its carbon impact in this phase, and this phase, and this phase, and add it all up and map it out. And then, this would be delivering the tires to the dealer. And then what is the carbon impact when the tires are on the car? And that has to do with the vehicle's emissions and like our share of that. And then at the end of life, there's tires are usually turned into something else. Usually they are used for fuel in cement kilns and pulp and paper mills. And then there's crumb rubber in things like soccer fields and playgrounds. And my favorite is rubber modified asphalt because it makes the roads actually better.
So you can now reuse old tires for new tires?
Not really. Not if you want a really high performance product. So the tire is baked like a cake. We call that vulcanizing the tire. And so all the properties change, so you can't really unbake it. But there's a lot of research going on in that area. There are a lot of startups that are saying, oh, we've discovered that we can do it, or we can at least create recycled carbon black, or one of the ingredient, one of the materials they'll say. In Pirelli, because we're so much in the high end, we're not, we want everything going into the tire to be like the highest quality, and so that's why. But you can make, a big farm tire or something and put some of that material in it. It's possible.
What's the average lifespan of a tire, just out of curiosity?
I don't know. I actually don't know at all. A lot of my colleagues would know that because they work on warranties and things. But I don't know. Sorry. Should we stop on sustainability?
Do you have a lot of banks coming to you now proposing like green bonds? I don't know if Pirelli has already done something like that.
Yes, we have had banks coming to us, and I believe we've gone to banks as well to discuss it. I'm not sure if I know that was under discussion. I don't remember if we actually finished and came out with a green bond, or if we will, or because that all happens in Milan. But I know that it's been on the table. Hopefully.
If I may ask, what has been, or what have you noticed in terms of differences working, not to make this a political point, but this administration compared to previous administrations, and just in terms, sustainability or economics of production and
that's a really good question. Also going
big issue, obviously.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I petered out.
So that's a very good question, and also, keeping in mind that my other role, I actually do weave sustainability into my government affairs work, and so, for example, in the Tire Trade Association, I led an effort to have the trade association do its first sustainability report, and to talk together about what we can do in this area. And also in the material, natural rubber and so on. So my feeling, and I also, because I was a journalist, I do write somebody asked me to write a column on sustainability for Inc.com, which is, Inc. magazine. And so I do that on the side. I have Pirelli's permission to write these columns. And I'm trying to kind of stay on top of the whole sustainability. I really think it's kind of the answer to how to go forward in capitalism is with these new sustainability models. That's my opinion. So I'm very interested in everything about it. And being in government affairs, I'm kind of paying attention to this question that you're asking about whether it's becoming harder in this political environment. What I think has happened is that all these people and organizations that were kind of half asleep are just waking up about it because of the political environment. So for example, the Trump administration rolled back the emissions, car emissions. Under Obama, the car companies needed to spend all this money to reduce emissions of their cars by X date, and that's called the CAFE standards. And the Trump administration rolled that back, and the car companies came out and said, actually, no, first of all, California still has these standards, Europe still has these standards, and the car companies came out and said, we don't want you to roll them back, we want you to talk to California and come to some alignment, and everybody's kind of stepping forward and doing sustainability and realizing that it has various advantages, from reputational advantages to retaining employees that are that want to work for a company that's not horrible, and then the business case for investors are starting to say that companies that do well especially on the risk when they report on their climate risk and they mitigate their risk and all of these complicated things, that those are the best managed companies that are going to do well, with their stock price. So that's happening more and more.
So businesses kind of taking the ball themselves and or continuing forward in a sense, irrespective of what the government is allowing or allowing. I mean, not to make a too general comment about it, but.
Well, okay, so an example of this is, I don't know if you've heard of the Business Roundtable. The Business Roundtable is this basically lobbying group in Washington that includes the CEOs of the biggest companies and the biggest banks like Morgan Stanley, and I'm sure that Microsoft and Amazon are in there. And they came out in August. They updated their statement of purpose, or it says it used to say the purpose of a company is to make profits for its shareholders, something like that, which was written by Milton Friedman. So they updated that in August, and they came out with a new statement saying the purpose of a corporation is to create value for its shareholders, but also its other stakeholders, employees, communities, and they listed the stakeholders. And then I started reading the Wall Street Journal op-eds about that. And keep in mind, I worked for the Wall Street Journal. I love it. The op-eds were like, "What? This is crazy. We're not all tree huggers now. What are they doing? That if they throw out, their focus on creating profits for shareholders, this is terrible, and they're going down the wrong path." And then I was reading these other commentaries saying this is just greenwashing. They're not really serious about it. They're not, they're never going to change their behavior. They're just greedy capitalists. So this, there's this huge debate that ensued. But and then I wrote my column saying the debate is all wrong, because what they did is just simply update their public-facing statements based on reality, meaning all big companies are doing this and saying this because it's good business, to focus on value creation for all the stakeholders. And this is something that has come about on a volunteer basis, as you said, not regulated. But and companies, I think, would much prefer it not to be regulated. Elizabeth Warren has a plan to make it regulated, like following those kinds of things, and say you have to create value for your stakeholders or something, which doesn't seem very practical to me. But it's happening that way. The real question is it happening fast enough and in a big enough way to, for example, to keep global warming contained to 1.5 degrees and so on? And I think the answer is no.
Even for Pirelli?
So the ultimate goal, according to the real sustainability kind of gurus, is to become a regenerative company, so that instead of having any kind of negative impact on society or the environment, you have a positive impact. And I don't know, there might be a couple of companies that are there, but I can't think of any, So so sustainability is a journey. Pirelli is not making a positive impact yet. I think that would be great. I don't know exactly personally what it would take to get to that, but it's just, I think the point now is to really try to reduce the negative impact still. It's also good to be strategic about it. I think, now there's something called science-based targets, which Pirelli is working on, but we haven't announced it yet, so this is off the record, even though I know that. But I'll just talk about this generally, okay? some big companies are doing and looking at, and Pirelli's looking at this. Science-based targets mean if you take 1.5 degrees as the goal of that the climate can't warm up more than that, what is my piece of that as a company? And there's a website called sciencebasedtargets.org or something, where they give you the tools to figure that out. It's like a mathematical formula. So in other words, if I don't know what it's based on because I haven't studied this personally, but if it's based on, I don't know if it's based on, my revenue, or if it's based on how much I polluted in 2000 as a baseline, or what it's based on. But in any case, there is a mathematical calculation where you can say, we have a target to cut our emissions by X by 2030, whatever. And that would be our share of getting the world to contain the warming to 1.5 degrees. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting development. And my favorite book right now is a book that I read recently that was written by an Oxford University economist, and it's called Donut Economics. And I don't know how many of you studied economics, but she points out that it doesn't make a lot of sense for for us to be so focused on growth and growth going like this forever, right? Because we have planetary boundaries, and so how can we really keep growing forever as companies? Keep growing our profit, keep growing our revenue forever. Are we going to get to a point where it's too much? And I think you could talk about it also from a consumption point of view, like can we really consume more shampoo and more, diapers and more whatever. So anyway, so her idea was, here's a donut. Her idea was, these are the planetary boundaries on the outside, and here you have a hole in the middle, which is that because there are people, this is the social part, there are people that are not in the economy because they're starving, because they have HIV, because they're out of the economy, and so that's where the growth is, because you need to bring those people into the economy. But you can't exceed the planetary boundaries, so we have to start thinking about consuming less, and the sharing economy, and the circular economy. Has anyone heard of the circular economy? It's a new term. What it means is instead of taking materials out of the ground or out of agriculture, turning them into something and then throwing them away, it becomes circular. So it's about having an iPhone that can be disassembled and reassembled again. It's about, like what you said about recycling, making new tires with old material, recycled material. That would be circular. Unfortunately, we're not there yet, but there are a lot of things that are starting to be designed in such a way that they could have another life and another life and another life. So that's a big...
It doesn't necessarily have to be the same product to be circular, right? I mean, that means
right.
So tires can't be tires again, but like you said, they could be asphalt.
Yeah, so the asphalt is a fairly
This is an example.
Yeah, that's a fairly circular example, because actually asphalt is dug up and then used again when they repave the road. I found out, I didn't know that, but so that's a kind of a pretty circular use, which is why I like it. In addition to the fact that it's actually,
right.
If you choose that asphalt over a plain asphalt, it's better. Any other thoughts?
You see, in the future,
What?
in the future, let's say, like a shift from rubber to anything else. Maybe this is also like how an actual tire is built. Like if we build a different tire, maybe we wouldn't need rubber anymore.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. So a couple of prototypes that other companies have done. 3D printed tire without rubber. Non-pneumatic tire, I think that means without rubber. And made of other, like, light plastic or something. Another prototype, which is kind of fun, is Goodyear came out with a tire that has a terrarium in the middle, so that while it's on the road, it's, you know, having this photosynthesis and converting CO2 back to oxygen. So these are, you know, so tire companies actually get creative with these things. But you're right, I mean, the future could be completely different. We might have flying cars without tires, you know, like Uber is working on it. And interestingly, the auto shows, you know, it used to be that everyone went to Detroit for the auto show. Now everyone goes to this Consumer Electronics show in Las Vegas for automotive innovation. Because it's all like, you know, flying cars or these shared vehicles that maybe are modular and they turn, you know, like part of the vehicle goes off to deliver pizza and then, you know. So very interesting future. And it's an interesting time for the automotive sector because of connected, shared, autonomous, electric. You know, everything's changing. And so as a supplier, we need to think about, there was a slide about that.
Does the onset of electric cars have any relativity or impact for Pirelli tires, or does?
Yeah, we actually.
Maybe not for you, the high end of this on a racetrack. I mean, I don't know. I'm not so familiar with the tire, but. Yeah,
I mean, it does have an impact. The main thing, as far as I know, because I'm not a tire expert, as my son pointed out, the main thing is that they have to be very light and very quiet, and so you know, there's innovation around that. So Pirelli launched in the Geneva Auto Show this year a tire specifically for electric vehicles, and there will definitely be more of that coming.
Coming back to your career changes in Pirelli.
What am I going to do next?
No, because if you are recorded. How did you change this role? I mean.
That's good.
When you made the decision in your head, what were the practical actions that you took in order to get to the next step?
Right. Well, so actually, interestingly, when I made the first change from communications to government relations, Pirelli had offered these leadership training courses, and I actually worked with a coach, which Pirelli provided. So that was a great HR move. And I had been talking. What really happened in that case was that there was some people shifted around, and there was kind of an opening in government affairs, and so I talked to the coach about, you know, what I wanted to do, and I kind of talked about the fact that there was this opening, and then I talked to the other people that were in that department, and I talked to you know, it's a little tricky, obviously, because you have to figure out, you know, when and how to talk to your immediate boss about something like that. So I don't know if I have a good answer either about what I did or about what, you know, when somebody should do. But I think I was just trying to kind of be open with everybody and talk to everybody about what my goals were, and, you know, and that I wanted to. Because we had, when they hired me, we had this very intense period working on Telecom Italia. I was hired to do communications about Telecom Italia, and then that was sold, and so it was, so before that we had a press office specifically for Pirelli tires. And then, so it was almost like there were too many of us. Does that make sense? And so it worked out without anyone being mad about it. But it's definitely a tricky question. I mean, I think it's important. I had somebody in the Georgia office talk to me about kind of his career aspirations and and whether he could work in sustainability and work more with me and so on, which I thought was great. And I gave him advice and I said, let's talk to other people. Because obviously the priorities right now are this, and this, and so I think it's good for people to just talk and be open and say, I enjoy what I'm doing. I would like to have some options. I'm somebody that loves to grow. Does that help? I think it's also important, not to go to your company and say, I want to do something which the company doesn't need. You always have to put yourself in the shoes of the HR department, the CEO, what the company needs before proposing something that's just not going to be viable. Right? Any other questions?
If I can go one step back from Pirelli. So how was the transition from working for a newspaper where you have your deliverable of 4 articles a day and you're, I guess, a lot of adrenaline and everything, versus working in communication in a big corporation where things need to happen but not at the same pace?
Right. That's a good question. Actually, the main kind of cultural shift for me was being surrounded by people, because I was used to working with 1 or 2 people, and it took I got accused of being a little bit like keeping to myself and not integrating at the beginning, because I just was not that used to it. And I have to admit, I enjoy the autonomy that I have now and the job that I have now, because I go to Washington, I go maybe speak at a conference, I come back here, I have meetings, but it's me that's deciding. And obviously I keep my boss informed and we talk, and I get permission for what I'm doing to do what I'm doing. But I like, personally I like that. I heard that, people used to think, a long time ago, people used to think that the incentives in workplace had to do with money and maybe either like the carrot or the stick. And now I think they say that people are really inspired, or people are more productive if they are able to master a skill. And so this has been great for me to feel like I could learn about sustainability and be, one of the people that knows that skill, right? So mastering a skill, having a sense of purpose, which I obviously have in this job, being independent, and I think there's one more I forget. Does anyone else know? Haven't heard that. Anyway, but you asked a different question. So the adrenaline, that was difficult. It took me a while to get over that. It's really fun to see your name in the paper. And the pace was slower, but that was something that I needed to learn. I mean, it really, when I left the Wall Street Journal and started spending time with my children, and I started spending time with other people, like for instance singing in a chorus, and I realized that there are all these people that aren't, don't think it's a life and death thing if whatever was in the news, because I was so caught up in this world of headlines you know, the fast pace of the news. And so it was something that it was hard for me to adjust to, but it was good for me. And I thought, you know, this is so important for my personal sanity to know that there's a whole world out there. I don't need to be addicted to adrenaline. I can feel like I'm part of a team, like, you know, there are greater things. After that, actually, when I was in communications, there was the Foreign Press Club in Milan had they asked me to come and speak to a group of journalists who I knew them all. And there was a sort of a dialogue about what journalists want from communications departments and so on. And we were kind of doing back and forth with other communications people as well. And I remember I said, you know, when I was a journalist, I thought that if I was writing about a company, I thought the company had one mind. They knew what they were doing. They were trying to hide it from everybody, right? You know, so you as a journalist had to discover what the company was up to and reveal it to the world. And usually it was a bad thing. Companies are bad, and we're here to, you know, uncover that, right? That was sort of the attitude that we have. And then I said, you know, when I went to work for Pirelli, I realized that, you know, this is an organization that is providing jobs to all these people and providing a product that's necessary. And, you know, it's just a much greater picture. And then when you see, you know, how strategy is formulated, it's not, you know, maybe the company doesn't already know in one mind what it's going to do with respect to, you know, some problem next year, right? So it's kind of a moving, living organism. And I found that really interesting, that shift of perspective. And I also, you know, because I've been writing for investors, I said to this group, I was like, you know, I wasn't a financial journalist anymore, but financial journalists kind of, you know, they write for their readers. And so we acted like, you know, some trader on Wall Street was, you know, God, and the companies are all bad. And, you know, do you see what I mean? And so I really shifted my perspective about that. And I think there's room for improvement in journalism. Hi.
Bye, thank you very much. Sorry, I have to run.
No problem. Anything else? It's getting late probably.
Sorry, I have one more question.
Sure.
When you think about, so you work for the Wall Street Journal in Italy.
Yeah.
I find that it's always very refreshing to read foreign newspapers when they speak about Italy, because they give kind of more of a neutral point of view versus reading the Corriere or Libero or whatever, you know, in the middle.
Yeah.
What are your, like, what is your one thought on how can we inform ourselves better and be able to know about our country being so far, getting a neutral point of view, like an objective point of view?
Wow, that is a good question. Also because I have to admit that after years of being required to read every Italian newspaper all the time, I kind of got, I don't want to anymore, you know. But first of all, I agree with you that I think sometimes if a foreign journalist comes in and they have to summarize the whole thing about something, it's actually really useful because you get a summary. And you know, Italian journalism style is supposed to be complicated and not give you the quick summary. I guess I would suggest doing the same thing. So what I do for my news now is I try not to overwhelm myself. So I have like certain things that I just look at in the morning. I see the headlines, and including about sustainability. Like I have a rassegna stampa, what press? No, it's a press clipping service on sustainability that somebody put my name on, and so I can just, and then I tweet, like, I usually tweet at least one of those. Maybe didn't read the whole article, but I got the idea, you know. And then I'm actually, because of my work, I'm subscribed to The Hill, which covers, you know, politics and policy, but they have a really good just morning roundup. I don't watch a lot of TV. I don't think gives you, you know, except for like I watch the debates and things like, you know, things like that. But so anyway, I guess I would identify maybe like the morning email from Corriere and you know, a couple of just summer, and then as you said, maybe the foreign press, Italy, you know, covering Italy. I don't know, that wasn't a very good answer, but I think you probably are using the same thought process as I am when you try to resolve that for yourself. I mean, everybody today, everybody in any job has to be informed, right? And it's so time consuming. I was at a conference, and Jamie Dimon, the head of JP Morgan Chase, was there, and somebody asked him how much time he spends reading, and he was like 40% of the day. I know, it's crazy. Anything else?
Going back to the 12 pillars.
Yeah.
So to apply those, a company knows at the beginning is going to have a cost, right? A big cost probably. So you'll have no profits for sure at the beginning. So how, like, and I know you're saying this seems to be like a business model now.
Mm-hmm.
Is there companies that are not doing it, or is companies that are doing it just because everybody's doing it?
Well, okay, so that's something, that's why you have to really, there's a lot of, I mean, in my company anyway, in Pirelli, there's a lot of creativity around that. So the reason we can afford the 12 pillars is because we got all the stakeholders to come in and join. So like the car companies. And then, you know, the real question becomes, I mean, there are two questions about around the cost of sustainable natural rubber. One is, can we expect that a tire made with sustainable natural rubber could have a higher price, and would somebody be willing to pay that, whether it's a car company or a consumer? So that's one question that you have to look at. And the other question is actually these commodities are traded on futures markets, and their prices are, so it's really complicated to get around that. So I don't have an easy answer, but I just would say that whenever a company is evaluating a sustainability investment, like solar panels, there's a review of the return on investment, and it usually has to be in a reasonable time period. You know, you have to break even and make money on an investment in a pretty short time period. I don't know what specifically, but so for that reason, all these companies that sell solar panels and lighting solutions, LED lighting for a factory, are going around and saying, we will take on the investment with a financial partner like a bank, and you will pay us back by us getting the savings on your electricity bills over time. So they have these financing solutions for longer term, and that's what green bonds are, actually, too. You know, it's a corporate bond, but it's designed for an expensive infrastructure project that has to do with sustainability, and that's why. And they're doing well as far as I know. But I did see a study. Sorry, I did. I've written about, because of my column, I keep an eye on studies that come out, and there's a lot of work being done right now on the ROI of sustainability. So New York University is doing a big project where they're taking companies and going line by line and saying, what is the return on the investment in, also because today the value of a company's stock on the stock market is largely intangible stuff. It's not like adding up the building and the product and the warehouse. It's how much is the brand worth, it's the perception, it's the reputation, it's the patents, intellectual property, all of this intangible stuff. And so that ties in very closely with the fact that investors are now trying to get a grip on how can we quantify some of these things. And anyway, so one of the studies on the ROI of sustainability looked at the difference between the old model of corporate social responsibility, which was I'm a company and I do my business and I pollute the river and then I have environmental compliance, whatever it is. And then I throw money into a foundation that does charity work, right? That's the old thing. The new model is integrating, good practices into everything, right? So green, green supply chain and HR and all these things that we've talked about a little bit. And so this study looked at companies that they thought had integrated sustainability and then looked at the difference between ROI in different areas. And they found that the integrated companies had better, performance on the stock market, better credit ratings and things with ability to borrow money, better productivity of employees, there was a whole list of where they pulled out ROI in each area. It was pretty interesting. So I wrote about that.
Well, thank you again, Maureen, for your time.
Thank you so much.
Everybody was really interested about your life experience, work experience, and everything.
Thanks for the questions.
If anybody has any other questions, maybe you have a couple more minutes maybe on the side if anybody has additional questions. But thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you.